The solitude of the Wyoming high country was a bomb Gideon Kane applied to wounds he could not name. It was 1874 and the war was nearly a decade gone, but its ghost still walked with him in the thin cold air. His cabin, a squat structure of hewn logs chinked with mud, stood a stone's throw from a frozen creek, its back pressed against a stand of unyielding pines heavy with snow. He had built it himself, a fortress against memory, against the world of men that had failed him. He was a tall man made lean by hard work. His face, weathered by sun and wind, was a map of past hardships, with lines etched around the color of a stormy sky. His hands were calloused and capable, as comfortable with an axe as they had once been with a rifle. He worked as a ranch hand for a cattleman whose spread was a half-day's ride away, taking his pay in supplies and the right to be left alone. Town was a place he avoided. Lander was a raw settlement filled with noise and judgment. He saw in their faces the same blind certainty that had sent Boys, his own brother among them, into the meat grinder of war. The thunder of cannon still echoed in his quietest moments, so he kept to his cabin, to the company of the silent, snow-covered landscape and the unsparing mountains. That winter had been a bitter one, relentless in its assault. A blizzard had been raging for 2 days, a maelstrom of wind and blinding snow that had buried the high country under a deep, white blanket. The world outside his small cabin had been reduced to a roaring, white chaos. It was in the deceptive quiet of the storm's lull that he heard it, a sound that did not belong to the wilderness. It was human. A thin, desperate shriek, swallowed almost immediately by the wind's howl, followed by another just like it. Gideon froze, his head cocked. He thought he had imagined it. Another phantom from a past filled with cries. Then it came again, fainter this time, but unmistakable. His body moved before his mind had fully consented. He pulled on his heavy coat, wrapped a scarf around his face, and plunged into the waist-deep snow. The cold was a physical blow, and the wind, a living thing that tore at his breath. He fought his way forward, his eyes scanning the white expanse. And then he saw them, a flash of dark fabric and pale skin, not one figure, but two, huddled together against a snowdrift, their strength clearly failing. They were caught, two fragile anchors in a world of violent motion. He did not hesitate. He pushed through the biting wind and deep snow, the effort a burning strain on his lungs. As he got closer, he could see they were identical. Two young Chinese women, their dark hair crusted with ice, their faces pale with cold. One had her arm hooked desperately around her sister, while the other had her eyes closed, her face slack with near unconsciousness. He reached them, gasping for air. "Hold on," he yelled over the wind. He saw that one sister's leg was partially buried, and they were both shivering violently. He worked quickly, his numb hands digging away the snow. He freed her, but she was limp now, a dead weight. Using the last of his strength, he pulled them both from the snowdrift and began the brutal fight back to the cabin. He half dragged, half carried them through the blizzard's fury and collapsed inside the small cabin, his chest heaving. He rolled onto his side and pressed his fingers to their necks. He felt pulses, faint and thready, but there. One of them coughed, a racking sound, and her eyelids fluttered open, revealing dark almond-shaped eyes wide with a primal fear. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough. "You are safe," the other sister stirred, her eyes opening as well. They clung to each other, trembling violently, their simple cotton dresses in tatters. Where are we?" one of them whispered, her teeth chattering. "My land," he said, rising to his feet. "You need to get warm." "My cabin is close." He reached a hand down to help them. They flinched away from his touch, scrambling backward like a pair of startled deer. "No," one said, her voice shaking but firm. "Do not take us to town, please." Her plea was so filled with dread it stopped him cold. "I'm not taking you to town," he said gruffly. "But you'll die of cold out here. The cabin is your only choice." They watched him for a long moment, their dark eyes searching his face, weighing one danger against another. Finally, with a barely perceptible nod, they relented. They tried to stand, but their legs gave way. Without a word, Gideon scooped one of them into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, a bird-bone fragility that felt alien. She went stiff at his touch but did not fight him. He carried her to the cabin, then returned for her sister, a mirror image of the first rescue. He pushed the cabin door open and carried the second woman inside. The small one-room space was spare and orderly. A stone fireplace, a narrow cot, a rough-sawn table, and 2 chairs. It was the scent of the place, of smoke, coffee, and solitude, that seemed to unnerve them most. They were an intrusion, and they all knew it. He set the second sister down in the chair closest to the hearth. "Get those wet things off," he ordered, his back already turned as he added more wood to the fire. It was a command born of practicality. He did not look at them, giving them what little privacy the small room allowed. The silence was thick, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the sound of their chattering teeth. He felt a flash of irritation. He had not asked for this, for 2 half-frozen women with fear in their eyes to disrupt the quiet rhythm of his life. Yet, as he listened to the soft rustle of wet fabric being peeled from skin, a different feeling stirred in him, something akin to curiosity. Who were they, and what were they running from that was worse than a raging blizzard? He finally allowed himself to look at them. They were huddled together in his spare blanket, their wet clothes draped over the other chair. Their dark hair was a tangled mess, and bruises were already purpling on their skin. "My name is Gideon Kane," he said, breaking the silence. One of them looked up, her dark eyes meeting his for the first time without immediate fear. "I am Leanne," she whispered, her voice soft. Her sister added, "I am Maya." They sat that way for a long time, sipping the hot, bitter coffee he gave them. He watched them and saw the way they flinched when a log popped in the fire. They were wound tight with secrets. As dusk settled, an awkward tension fell between them. There was only one cot. "You take the bed," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll sleep by the fire." They nodded, their eyes downcast. He laid out his bedroll on the rough plank floor, keeping his back to them. He was acutely aware of their every movement, the soft rustle as they moved to the cot together. He stared into the dying embers, willing sleep to come, but his mind was agitated by their presence. The cabin felt smaller, the air charged with a strange intimacy. He heard one of them move behind him, the soft pad of her bare feet on the floor. Her voice came out of the darkness, a trembling whisper. "Mr. Kane." He did not move, did not turn. "What is it?" There was a long pause. He could hear the unsteady rhythm of their breathing. "Sir," the voice came again, this time May's. "Do you want to look at us?" The question hit him like a stray bullet. He remained frozen, his back to them, every muscle tense. Then Leanne's voice, even quieter, joined her sister's. "Will you stay if we undress?" In those words, he heard the echo of 100 transactions he could only imagine. He heard the shame, the resignation, the awful hollow bartering of women with nothing left to sell but themselves. They were offering him a payment for their rescue, for the food, for the shelter. A hot, unfamiliar shame washed over him, mingled with a surge of anger at them, at the men who had driven them to this, at a world that could break people down to such a point. He turned his head just enough to see their silhouette in the firelight. They stood together, clutching the blanket, a single fragile shape in the vast darkness. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his body fully away from them, presenting them with nothing but his rigid back. He stared hard into the glowing coals, his jaw clenched. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "No one is going to bother you here." He did not hear them move for a long time. When they finally did, it was the quiet sound of the cot ropes creaking under their weight, followed by a soft, choked sob that they tried and failed to stifle in the darkness. Gideon Kane lay on the hard floor, listening to the sound of their weeping and the unabated roar of the blizzard, feeling the first crack spread across the frozen walls he had built around his heart. The night's raw confession hung in the air between them long after the fire had died. The heavy snow made travel impossible, trapping them in a world no bigger than Gideon's small plot of land. The sisters, it turned out, were not women who could abide idleness. They fell into a strange, unspoken rhythm with him. They cooked and cleaned with a quiet efficiency, their hands always busy. They spoke to each other in low, rapid Chinese, a language that was as foreign and mysterious to him as their past. Little by little, in fragmented English, their story emerged. Their father had come from across the ocean to work on the railroad. A man chasing a dream of gold and a better life. He had died in a rock slide a month ago, leaving them orphaned and in debt to the cruel camp foreman, a man named Croft. Croft had claimed that their father's debt now belonged to him, along with all his meager possessions, including his daughters. They were property to be collected. They had packed what little they owned and fled in the dead of night, only to be caught by the raging blizzard. Gideon listened, his face a granite mask. He knew the kind of men who ran labor camps. He understood the casual cruelty, the utter lack of law or mercy. As they spoke of their fear, he found himself speaking of his own. He told them of the war, of his brother Samuel, who had died of dysentery in a camp in Virginia without ever seeing a real battle. He told them how he'd come back to find his home and future gone. How he'd come west to lose himself. Their confessions hung between them, a bridge of shared ruin. For the first time, Leanne and Mai looked at him not as a savior or a threat, but as a man who understood the language of grief. Their companionship was a thing of quiet spaces. A language grew between them in the way he left a bucket of fresh water for them by the door, and the way they left a hot cup of coffee for him on the hearth. For the first time since the war, Gideon felt the sharp edges of his solitude begin to soften. Their presence was a low, steady warmth against the persistent chill of his memories. But with this growing comfort came a tension. One afternoon, he came back to the cabin and saw them down at the creek, which had begun to thaw, washing their long black hair. The sunlight filtered through the cottonwoods, dappling their skin. It was a simple, innocent act, but watching them, Gideon felt a powerful, visceral jolt of desire. It was so sharp he turned away abruptly, his heart hammering, ashamed of the thoughts that had risen so easily. They were survivors he had sworn to protect. They were not for him to want. The outside world intruded on the fourth day. Gideon saw a rider coming from a long way off. A flicker of panic crossed the sisters' faces. "Who is that?" Mai asked. "Just a hand from the ranch," Gideon said. "He won't bother you," but as the rider drew closer, Gideon's gut tightened. It wasn't one of the ranch hands. It was a stout, hard-faced man he didn't recognize, followed by two others. Croft. The name was a cold stone in his stomach. The sisters saw him, too, and all the color drained from their faces. They scrambled back into the cabin like mice darting from a hawk. Croft and his men reined in their horses a few yards from the cabin, their expressions a mixture of arrogance and menace. "Well, well," Croft called out, his eyes sweeping over the small homestead. "Looks like my property has wandered off." He dismounted, his movement slow and deliberate. "I've come for what's mine, Cain. The girls and the debt they owe me." "They don't owe you anything," Gideon said, his voice dangerously calm. He stood on the porch, a solid, immovable wall. His gun was not drawn, but his hand hovered near its hilt. "Stay out of this, Yankee," one of Croft's men growled. "This is our business." "They are my business now," Croft spat and lunged for the cabin door. Gideon moved with the speed of a striking snake. He shoved Croft back with one hand and drew his pistol with the other. But he had underestimated them. The second hired man was already moving, not with a gun, but with a knife. As Gideon turned, the man rushed him, the blade a silver arc. He parried the first thrust, the steel scraping against his gun barrel. He brought the heavy pistol down in a brutal arc, catching the man on the side of the head. The man staggered, but he was tough. He came back, jabbing low. Gideon felt a sudden white-hot fire in his left side. He grunted as the blade sank into his ribs. He stumbled back, a dark wet stain already spreading across his shirt. Leanne and Mai screamed from inside the cabin. The world seemed to slow down. Mai saw Gideon stagger, his face contorting in pain. She saw Croft smile, a cruel, triumphant smirk. In that moment, something inside her snapped. The fear, the grief, the years of helplessness, they burned away, leaving behind a core of pure rage. The heavy iron skillet she'd been cleaning sat on the hearth. Without thinking, she grabbed it. As the man who had stabbed Gideon turned toward the door, Mai burst out, swinging the skillet with all her might. The heavy cast iron connected with the man's head with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the ground without a sound. Everything froze. Croft and his remaining man stared, stunned at the small woman holding the skillet, her chest heaving. In that frozen moment, Gideon, despite the searing pain in his side, pushed himself off the wall. He fired his pistol, not at Croft, but at the ground near his feet. The shot kicked up a spray of dirt that made Croft yelp and jump back. "Get out of here," Gideon growled, his voice strained but full of menace. "And if you ever come back, I'll bury you on this land." Croft looked from Gideon's smoking gun to the unconscious man on the ground, and then to the two women standing together on the porch, one with a skillet, the other with eyes blazing with defiance. The odds had changed. He cursed, grabbed the reins of his man's horse, and rode away, leaving his wounded companion in the dust. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and healing. The doctor from Lander, summoned by a ranch hand, declared that the knife had missed anything vital but had gone deep. Gideon's small cabin became a sickbed. Time was measured by the changing of bandages and the slow return of color to his face. Leanne and Mai never left his side. They were fierce, tireless guardians of his recovery, their roles shifting from rescued to caretakers. In this crucible of vulnerability, the last of their walls crumbled. He was no longer just the strong rescuer, and they were no longer fragile victims. They were a man and two women bound by a shared fight. In the long, quiet nights, they lay beside him on the narrow cot, their warm presence a comfort against the pain. It was in these dark hours that his own ghosts came for him. The war, which he had kept locked away, broke free in his fevered dreams. He would cry out in his sleep, his body thrashing. "Samuel," he would shout, his voice thick with an old, unhealed agony. They did not try to wake him. Instead, they would lean close, their voices a lifeline in his sea of memory. "You are not there, Gideon," Leanne would whisper. "The war is over," I would add, "you are here with us." "You are safe," they would describe the room, the pattern of the moonlight, the weight of the quilt, until the tension left his body, and he would quiet, his hand finding theirs in the darkness. They were calming the ghosts that had haunted his solitude. His physical strength returned slowly. One afternoon, he took his first few shuffling steps to the window, leaning on them for support. They stood there, looking out at the now calm and clear landscape. He looked at the women who had nursed him, who had fought for him, who had faced down his demons with nothing but the soft power of their voices. He saw his future standing right there beside him. The thought of a life without them was a cold, empty void. He had nothing to offer but the simple, profound truth of his heart. "This place," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. "It could be your home, if you'll have it." Tears welled in Leanne's eyes. Mai smiled, a fragile, beautiful thing. They were as broken in their own ways as he was. Mai answered his offer with a question of her own, the same one from that first terrifying night, but now stripped of all its shame and filled with a new, hopeful meaning. "Will you stay, Gideon?" He did not need to answer. He simply leaned in and kissed Leanne, then Mai, a gentle kiss of acceptance and promise. He was home. They did not stay in the old cabin. Together they built a new home on a rise overlooking the creek, with a porch for watching the sunset. They built it with their own hands, every log a testament to the life they were forging together. The seasons turned. Their life settled into a peaceful, hard-working rhythm. One late summer afternoon, they rode out together along the creek. As they rode, Leanne's hand slipped from her reins and found his. A moment later, Mai's hand covered both of theirs, a simple gesture of belonging. He looked over at them, at their faces, which were no longer haunted by fear but were instead softened by love and lit by genuine, radiant smiles. And in that moment, he smiled back, a rare, true smile that reached his stormy eyes and erased the last shadows of the war, of the grief, of the solitude. The pain they had all carried had not vanished. The ghosts were still there. But now they rested quietly between the three of them, held in the space of their shared life, no longer a weight to be carried alone.